next segment, I'm here talking with the Chief Data Officer for GE, the Chief Global Data Officer, Diwakar Goel. We're going to be talking about how to manage the complexity of an industrial conglomerate with data. Diwakar, it's great to talk to you today.
Lisa, look forward to it.
So let's talk about this. Your role in GE, how are you working to manage the complexity of all this data?
You know, it's funny you say that. I think, Lisa, when you run a complex organization like GE, which has verticals like aviation, healthcare, power, and we operate in 150 countries, the reality is the only way you can manage a conglomerate like that is using data. So, you know, data is kind of the bridging factor that brings all of this together and helps the management decide on what actions to take, where to go and invest, how do you pull the levers around cost. So data is actually the bridging factor of how to run a company successfully today.
And give me a picture into the amount of data. I think hundreds of petabytes, well over 100 applications. What's that landscape like?
So, you know, obviously the landscape is twofold. One is we have thousands of machines every part of the world, right? So we're bringing in data from those systems. But then we have 150 systems, large systems within GE that contributes of how our ERPs are run, how our commercial systems are run, how our supply chain is run, right? To give you an example, we have the third largest SAP and the fifth largest Oracle ERP as a part of the GE's ecosystem. We ingest roughly around 4 to 5 million transactions every minute. That's the volume of transactions we bring in. So there is a ton of complexity, and I think the complexity is also about, you know, these systems are a little different, they are structured a little different. So it's not just about the size and the volume of the data. Candidly, big data is in a position to handle a lot of that efficiently. It's more about, you know, how disparate or how, you know, non-alike these data sets are.
So with that, the disparity, talk to us about some of the challenges that you had going, okay, we can ingest all this data. I know that you built a 500 petabyte Hadoop-based data lake. Ingesting the data is one thing, but being able to actually cull insights from it and build relationships is a whole other thing. So talk to me about a couple years ago when you started building this huge data lake, what you were aiming to do and what problem you were aiming to solve.
Yeah, we started this journey into the big data foray, I would say 4.5 years back. And I think one thing that I have learned in this journey of big data is things are changing because it's a fairly new field. So, you know, it's not that it's a mature segment, you know, you have to go and buy an Oracle or an SAP for an ERP. Every time the tech is changing, right? So when we were moving ahead 4 years back, Hadoop seemed to be where the world was gravitating, right? It was initially designed for parametric data set, but we could see them moving towards the relational arena, right? And we kind of bet into Hadoop and Spark as being our ecosystem back in the days. What happened is, obviously, Hadoop couldn't handle a lot of the complexity itself. So, you know, there were a lot of simple problems, something as handling a lot of updates or mutable data sets. We had to work around it and solve them. So it's not that you didn't solve it, but you started realizing you were spending a lot of energy on things which were not really differentiating you, right? So, you know, you didn't want to spend that much of engineering effort into those, rather spend into really solving the business problem that you have, right? So I think that's when I got in touch with Nikita at that time from SingleStore, and we started working on it. We actually started using SingleStore for a small portion of our ecosystem and slowly expanded to it.
Talk to me about, I know you had about 32 data warehouses. Talk to me about SingleStore in particular. You mentioned talking with Nikita. What was it that you saw in the technology that really differentiated it from the other technologies that you were trying to make usable?
Yeah, I think there are a few things, Lisa. First and foremost, what we're trying to do on GE a little bit is, because we have around 40,000 users, right? And we have a lot of different kinds of problems. So each of these problems have a different ask. So for us and me as a data officer, there are 2 or 3 things I'm trying to do. First is, how do I bring all the data and make it look the same, right? So that's one part of the challenge we're solving, right? The second part is, you know, it is going to be impossible for me to cater the problem of every individual, right? And it's honestly going to be limiting, right? So you need to really create an ecosystem or a platform which supports citizen development and self-service, right? And that's very complicated because you're now giving the keys to the kingdom to the people, but you need a platform that can handle it, right? And then in third, you really want to be able to drive large-scale transformation programs, right? Where you get multi-million-dollar benefits, right? So these are the three things that you're trying to do. And historically, as we were starting the Hadoop journey, we actually didn't see one single platform being in a position to solve all of those for us, because the nature of the kind of platform they needed, the performance they needed, the latency they needed, everybody had their own challenges and demand. And we historically thought that we would need to, I would say, rely on a multitude of these technologies to solve these problems for us. And that's how we were approaching. We were using the Spark Hadoop ecosystem. We were using MSQL in certain pockets. We were using certain technologies from Oracle in some pockets, right? Kind of designing a fit for purpose ecosystem, right? The good and bad of that was, obviously, we were able to tailor-made and pick and choose things which were well designed for that problem. But at the same time, the bad of that was it was becoming fairly complex, to some extent unmanageable, right? But at the same time, we didn't have a choice because there was no single ecosystem that could solve all of that for us, right? And then we started working with MemSQL, and a little bit, the name now SingleStore kind of starts making sense and resonating because it started becoming that for us. We could see the potential of that taking away all the different complexity and the challenges that we were having and bringing it all together, right? I would be honest that, a couple of years back, it was not that it was a silver bullet. We knew that it would solve 100% of our problem, but we saw it solving 80%. And we had a great partnership in Nikita and Raj to, work alongside us to solve the remaining 20%. And I would say we have made great headway in solving maybe 15% of the 20%, right? And that is, I think, something that we all need to recognize, because this is not that if you're trying to find a silver bullet, it's not going to be. You need to find a partner to work with, and that's what we see in SingleStore for us.
And also the name, as you mentioned, the new name SingleStore, one of the things that you were describing that I heard was in how you were trying to approach this problem before working with SingleStore. I heard complexity, different systems, and I thought, but the whole idea here is to be able to manage industrial complexity with data. So let's talk about some of the business outcomes. You're working in close partnership with the CEO, Raj Verma, with Nikita as well. Give me an idea, the cash process, for example, supply chain, the outcomes, the business outcomes that SingleStore is helping you drive.
Sure. And I would say, Lisa, there are a variety of problems. They're like we solving 100+ different use cases. I'll give you a few that are of different kinds. That gives you a little bit of flavor of what we're solving and what we've been able to solve with SingleStore, right? On one side, what we're doing is taking something which is very fundamentally basic, but very expensive. So an example of is, historically we would do our stat and tax audits decentralized. So what that would mean is for a company like us, our auditors like KPMG and Deloitte would go to 150 countries, go and collect the data, and then do auditing on us, right? Today, with the power of this technology, we're able to not only bring all of that data together, we are able to have our auditors sit in one single room, 5 of them, not like 200 of them, and just get everything in a self-service fashion, right? This is driving up productivity over 5 years for us. Just a simple example, right? On the other side, we are trying to now leverage AI and solve some of the typical cash problem. When you're dealing with so many countries, so many banks, right? You always don't know when you're making payments, whether the payment has gone through. You need to reconcile something like that across 4 or 5 different steps. And historically, we'll have an army of people behind the scene who are checking at every step what's going on, and we will be reacting, right? Now we're able to use the platform like MemSQL as well as, I would say, design AI processes around it to be able to do transactional reconciliation across the ecosystem, right? So we're able to drive programs and benefits to further optimize our supply chain process. And then on the other side, we are able to build what we call as conversational cockpits, right? And this is a little bit like in the future, our management needs to have access to what's going on and what's going to happen. It's no longer an era where we can just look at tail lights as to what has happened and then you react to it, right? So we are able to build those conversational platform where they are able to get a pulse of what the organization is, what's happening in the organization real time, but more importantly, have a very good view of what's going to happen. And then once they have that view of the world, they're able to now drive what can I change to make what's going to happen better, right? So you are now able to bring all of that and give that power to our executives to be able to in better control of the future than to be honestly relying on what's just going to happen and then react to it, right? So there is a ton of outcomes around different areas that we've been able to drive over the last 4 or 5 years. And I just feel that we're just still scratching the surface in this arena.
Well, Diwakar, it's been great to talk to you to understand how you are working with SingleStore to manage this conglomerate, this industrial conglomerate with the massive amounts of data. I heard simplification. You said earlier going from 32, replacing 32 data warehouses. And also one of the things I heard that SingleStore is enabling is you to be able to have better communications and streamlined communications with the executive suite so that the data is actionable now. We want to thank you so much for your time and look forward to seeing what's next with GE and SingleStore.
Thank you, Lisa.
All right, guys, moving on. Our next segment is coming right up.